Welcome to the next instalment of the Novus World Architecture Day interview series. Again, I'm Paul Thornwell, General Manager of Product Sales and Marketing at Novus. We're really looking forward today to hearing from our next featured architect, Fariborz Hatam. Take it away, Linda.
Welcome back to the Novus World Architecture Day interview series. Today, we're speaking with Fariborz Hatam, founder of FHSI Architects. Before he established his practice in 2011, Fariborz was design director at international firm ADAS. His experience extends across Australia, Europe, and the Middle East, and he has expertise in urban design, master planning, sustainability, and cultural architecture. Welcome, Fariborz.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
You've worked in a number of different cities around the world, and as we know, architecture is a highly contextual practice. I'm interested to know, what is the common thread amongst all these different contexts that you've worked in?
Look, there's three main elements that is a key to our projects, no matter where we work, and is understanding and achieving a sense of place, culture, and identity. If I basically take you through each one step by step, but if we look at the sense of a place, for example, topophilia, which means love of a place, is defined as a strong, impressive relationship between people and the places. So place play an important, essential, and vital role in our human life. So each place has its own unique character. A sense of place is an important issue that we can strengthen and relationship between human and a place. So if we look at urban design as an example, and urbanization, which is happening around the world, our main goal should be really to create a sense of place. So as architects and governments, we should really pay more attention to the quality of the place and the built environment. So the role design as a tool to answer human needs and expectation is more significant. If we look at in terms of the place attachment, in terms of culture, the role of culture is really to promote architectural identity is a must in any place we work. In terms of place identity, the identity is an issue that is important to all areas of art, including architecture. So the questions like, where do we belong, who are we, and where we're going can become important as we relate it to culture, religion, and nation and countries. So it can be said that every civilization or ethnic groups offer specific architecture in accordance with their culture at different times. So place of identity, culture, and sense of place and belonging are highly important aspects in every project in accordance with location to ensure that our design basically responds appropriately.
Yes, the sense of place is so important in architecture. Speaking of sense of place, a lot of your work has been in the Middle East, particularly in Dubai, and which is a region that we don't hear a lot about in Australia. Can you tell us what the architectural culture is like there?
Look, we went to Dubai about 18 years ago when it was at the start of its basically growth, really. Dubai, people need to understand, is a world-class transit city destination. So it's basically people that are transiting and living there. It's extravagant, it's excessive, inconsequent, and opulent architecture. But at the same time, it's a mind-blowing, impressive, and unique for its own, basically, destination that it is. So remember, I mean, Dubai really achieved in the last 30 years? Most countries won't even be able to achieve it in 100 years plus. So in such a short span of time, so their model is so different when we compare it, for example, to Australia. So Dubai's model is to really reinforce their position in an international scene as an economic powerhouse, not just in the Middle East, but to the rest of the world, a destination that they're trying to create at the moment. So by having the tallest building in the world, the indoor ski resorts in the Middle East, the resorts that you see, the golf courses, it's what we used to call it the Las Vegas of basically the Middle East. So, but everything usually comes at a cost when we started speeding these construction and going, and the culture element of it. So if we look at it from a sustainability, for example, let's take a water essential, water which is quite essential part of our daily life. All the water that you see in Dubai comes from the sea through desalination process, with heavily environmental cost and energetic basically consequences. So there's no water source more energy intensive than the ocean desalination at the moment. If we look at the destruction of its shore flora and fauna that's done through construction, through these artificial islands, and which is in turn damaging all the natural shorelines through modification on its tide current and destroying mountains near the Oman border at the moment. And really by placing glass boxes in the middle of basically heated desert without considering the environmental impact. So as an architect, I would say, is Dubai a visit city? Definitely, but not only to learn through what's been done, but really look at it from a technical marvel this city has to offer, but really question the capability of such magnificence. Could we have taken our time and planned it better? What is the rush? These are the questions I ask all the time. Why is it we speeding so fast? So we could have actually, looked at it more from a sustainability point of view rather than just basically buildability.
Yes, such important questions indeed. Your practice has operated across 4 countries. How do the differences in culture out there affect your approach to practice?
Look, our practice is we always try to, the global knowledge combined with driven local expertise is an important one. When we look at, for example, staffs that have a lot of international expertise, they're basically, so our staff in China and Dubai are basically not that internationally they're there, but also we got a local basically experience that are tuned for that local Pacific area. I think also through research, through multidisciplinary approach, where we look at basically like, for example, the social, the ROIs aspect, the environmental aspect of it as well. So this is just some of the stuff that we think the practice is doing well in it.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain a bit more about that dynamic between the global expertise and the local knowledge?
Yeah, look, I think the global expertise comes from the fact, I'll give you an example myself, where I've had the opportunity not just to work in Dubai, which is the Middle Eastern region, but also I worked in Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai, London, and most of our partners at that level have worked all around the world. I think that's the global expertise that they bring in. But at the same time, because I was situated in Dubai itself, and let's say someone like one of the partners situated in Hong Kong, we catered ourselves to the local knowledge of that region itself. So not just basically having that global, but we really custom tune it for that local expertise at the same time as well.
Mm-hmm. And with so many studios in so many countries, how has the pandemic affected your multinational practice?
Look, when one works, internationally, I guess, the virtual connectivity and the communication becomes part of your daily life. So things like Zoom meeting and all that we've been doing this for years. It's not our first time doing this. So with the advancement of that, we physically don't need to be really in one room to get the work done. However, in cities like Dubai and Hong Kong, which lots of work from neighboring countries are coming through, I think what's really affected us is really that travel that has been the major obstacle, we not being able to travel in different places. This has created not just a new way of work or communication, but it's allowed us, I guess, if you look at it from the other point of view, this pandemic has actually allowed the earth to breathe a bit. So the question I ask really from everybody, will the earth remember coronavirus pandemic? Because we keep asking humans that, but we're not asking the earth itself. So I'll show you some of the recent studies shows various types of pollution that's declined significantly by basically us not driving, not using the planes, the factories have basically remained shut. The nitrogen dioxide emitted from vehicles in China has dropped for almost 40 to 60%. The carbon monoxide concentration above New York had fallen by half of basically compared to 2019. The worldwide emission of carbon dioxide are down by 17% a year ago. And analysts basically suggest by 2020, we will see the biggest year-on-year drop for those emissions. That will be about 2 billion metric tons, which is about 5.5% of 2019's total. So what are we going to do? Do we go back to our cubicle days of our offices after this pandemic? What have we learned from it? And increase the number of office space and reduce the interaction and well-being and build more offices, which adds more carbon dioxide? Or are we actually going to find different ways of actually working cleverly? So I think these are some of the questions that we're asking after the pandemic.
Yeah, and so what have you learned from this experience? Are there any changes that your practice will continue with?
Look, I think our practice ethos has always been towards science and sustainability, we always look at positive stuff rather than the negative side of it. I think the positive that we are allowing the earth to breathe, which is a good thing, but there's also a social implication of it as well, and we have to be very careful for years and years. If I give you an example of an office scenario, we build these offices to create these kind of social aspects, interaction, communication, and try to get them over years of getting them out of the cubicles to be able to, so people can actually work in studio and co-working, networking. But I hope the pandemic doesn't force people to go backwards again, because that will not just add more spaces on this earth, which means we have to build more, but it will really have more impact on the environment at the same time as well. So I think we've got to be very cautious what we do.
Very important indeed. Speaking of sustainability, I've read that you've worked on a project that was the first zero carbon and zero waste community. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Look, we've done a number of projects that's basically touched on the zero carbon and sustainability, but the major one that we actually worked on and we were privileged was Masdar City itself, which was initially designed by Foster's and Partners, but we were in charge of what we call the MIST, the Masdar Institute and Science Technology Park. Now, the Masdar itself, as you know, is really dependent on oil at the moment, and they're using a lot of energies in terms of creating these kind of ski slopes and ice parks in the middle of a desert, or what I call glass boxes in the middle of a desert. So, and because of the urbanization, I think the UAE is now really taking initiatives. How do we actually go and actually start being practical and designing in a desert environment? So really have to look at sustainability and how we actually survived for hundreds of years, you know? So if you look at the concept, the Masdar concept was really taken from a city called Shibam in Yemen, which was a 16th century basically city, which really gave an example of a good urban planning and principle, but also looking at vertical construction and socio-economic side of it at the same time, sustainability and wind flow. So that's how Masdar was basically based on the Shibam. And Shibam at one point, because it was the tallest kind of building in Yemen, which they used to call it the Manhattan of the desert, basically. So when Masdar was looking at that, they really start to understand some of the basic principles of basically Shibam, and how do they go from a Shibam which has been sitting there since the 16th century to a zero carbon, zero waste. So that's where Masdar came in, and to create this kind of place by mimicking some of their for example, networks of roads and buildings that are closely together, putting it in a north, basically a north-south orientation, capturing the wind that's coming through, but also really understanding how the wind flows and how they can actually deflect wind into a series of courtyards. So some of the initiatives that Masdar that we were getting involved with was really relying on solar energy and renewable energy, becoming a hub really for clean tech companies. Building in Masdar City really, you would say, 40% less energy and water than the rest of basically the buildings that was in Abu Dhabi. And the walls of the buildings that we actually had to design was to reduce air conditioning by really 55%, which in terms of living in a hot desert climate, it's almost like 10 degrees less than the rest of Abu Dhabi at the moment. I mean, I can tell you in terms of Tapware, which is Novus is quite good at. I mean, when you look at light switches and taps, everything had to be censored. So we're not actually using that, but it's all being consumed basically according to when your usage is required. So these are some of the basic principles that we actually had to do for Masdar.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I didn't know that Masdar was based on or inspired by a 16th century city.
Yeah, most people, I mean, if you study Shibam in Yemen, it's quite fascinating because, but you have to also understand the Shibam, which is basically, it's culturally driven as much as architecturally driven. So when you go to Shibam, all these, you could have about a kilometer by a kilometer where they're all kind of related to one another and everyone knows each other. It's almost like a little country town that you go to.
Wow. So is sustainability an important thing for your practice?
Oh my God, of course. Look, we believe in green buildings can and must be at our center of our lives. Changing climate means that we must take action and design and build in innovative ways to enable us to grow and thrive over a long haul. So globally, I can tell you that buildings are responsible for about 30% of global energy consumption and 30% of greenhouse gas emission, and on average, 50% of emission in our major cities at the moment. So green buildings can really help combat the climate change that we're facing today, as well as really achieve numerous other aspects like the social, economic, environmental, and really health benefits. It's the most basically cost-effective means of really reducing global emission, as well as offering significant opportunities in terms of, I would say, energy reduction, cost saving, job creation, and building more resilient economy, I would say. FHSI pursues best practice, local and international standards, performance tools such as Green Star Well Building Standards. We also do living building challenges to meet really our sustainability goals at the moment.
Yeah, so for you, sustainability is not just about energy reduction. Your practice is also interested in biomimicry. Can you explain what this entails in architecture and how do you explore that in your Australian Biome project?
Look, in FHSI, we always say we combine science and architecture. That's so important. We believe in designing buildings that have positive impact on human and natural systems that interact with them, yeah? So biomimicry really offers an interconnected understanding of how life works and ultimately where we fit in. It is scientific research based on practice of learning from and then emulating really nature's form and process and ecosystems to create a more regenerative basically design. If we look at the natural world as a truly sustainable model, for example, that has lasted and thrived for a long period of time, our goal is to really design buildings that can scale, that operate as cleanly, beautifully, and efficiently, basically in a nature's architecturally. So when we look at the Australian biome, which is the first, I would say, indigenous cultural precinct that's been proposed over 200 years in Australia. Our goal is to really design a culturally rich, fully regenerative design that will act as a wildland of WA, of Western Australia. This means by creating this building, we have a positive environmental impact on basically carbon, water, waste, energy, and material efficiency that really embraces the ecology of a place, a sense of belonging, equity, and inclusion, health, happiness, and inspiration, and of course, aesthetic beauty that we're bringing along with it.
Yeah. Can you talk about the design of the Australian biome a bit more?
Unfortunately, we can't disclose it because we're still with the at a governmental level that we are talking to government. So, but hopefully, if all things are progressing well in the next a month or so, we should be able to release that to the public.
Okay. Well, we'll wait with bated breath. So finally, for this,
You're not the first one asking me this, Linda.
well, any chance we can. So for this interview series celebrating World Architecture Day, we're asking why architecture matters. Now, of course, for the profession, this is not a question that needs to be asked, but how do you communicate to the average person on the street why architecture should matter to them?
Look, we taught very, very hard when we were designing our logo, and our logo had to represent something very strong from the beginning. Our aim is really to produce clever, intelligent buildings that people admire and inhabit. So if you look at our logo, you will see that there's a dot that's floating onto the side. The dot represents what we call the unknown. We start our design process with a dot. We say two dots become a line. A series of line and ideas becomes a sketch. The sketch becomes a concept becomes reality, and the reality becomes history. The architecture then becomes our identity and culture. So when you go and visit places like the Colosseum, the Persepolis, the pyramids, the Eiffel Tower, and the Burj Khalifas, this is why architecture matters. Because without them, we will not be able to visit any of these countries.
Yes, like you say, from a dot to our identity and history.
Exactly.
Well, Fariborz, it's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you. It has been an absolute pleasure for us to be involved in such an event. And I would like to express my real thank to Novus for inviting us for such a beautiful event, and we would love to be part of it in the future as well.
Thanks, Fariborz.
Thank you.